in these kind of times.
Deputy Prime Minister Šuvalov, this is probably one of the most difficult years for President Vladimir Putin and the Russian economy. Sanctions are in place. We're looking at potentially, according to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, a contraction of nearly 5%. The IMF puts it at 3%. How do you navigate very choppy waters with the political situation you're faced with the European Union and the United States?
But that's not the first time. You know, if we recall different crises in my country, I recall the fourth one. And in 2007, the oil price dropped again dramatically, and you know, we survived. And 2 years later, we felt much stronger. This time again, the forecasts are different. This, you know, forecast is possible. This is a possible scenario. But at the same time, we have maybe a scenario where we will be around zero. It means the economy is freezing. The half of our oil incomes will disappear. But at the same time, we understand there is a structural need to perform something else and to find new markets for our export goods, which was not the, you know, the agenda for Russians before, because it was money coming from selling oil and gas. So this is another challenge, but I think we will scope.
As you know, there's been talk of reform for a decade in Russia, and the discussion to look for other markets and tilt to the east. The reality is, this government got a little bit spoiled by $100 oil, and that's right. Forestalled the reforms.
I have to admit, you're right. We were spoiled by these numbers, and people were just expecting new numbers of, you know, public expenditures. And people were, you know, they were not motivated to work harder to provide labor productivity. But now this is the case where we will do this because we are forced.
Let's shift to the oil producers. Let's shift to the oil producers and start with Russia. Deputy Prime Minister Šuvalov, many think that Saudi Arabia has been targeting Russia, targeting the U.S. shale producers. It is a fight over market share. How do you counterbalance this downward pressure when your export earnings are so dependent on oil?
First, I would say that ruble will, after depreciation, dramatically appreciate. So no worries. And after high volatility, I think it will be very stable for a while. And so there is no, you know, scary about this. Our dependence on oil, you know, it's known, nothing new. We knew, and for many years, it started in the Soviet Union, back in the Soviet Union, and we recall the times in mid-80s when Soviet Union started suffering from lower oil prices. Now again, is the structure of our economy still the same? Of course not. It changed a lot. But we cannot say that we are independent from oil revenues. But at the current moment, I think our budgetary revenues much less dependent on oil and gas than it was 10 years ago. Now it's around 50%. Before it was much higher. The structure is shifting, but slowly. Nothing good for us at the moment. 2015 is going to be a hard year. But at the same time, as again, your first question, it will force us to provide better structure for the economy for the next decade. This is a very hard agenda, but we are focused on it. With China, they are interested in lower prices, but at the same time, we are interested in very good customers. China maybe is going to be #1 customer for Russia because they are a very predictable and good partner. And they say whatever prices, but we will consume. And for Russian producers, it's very important to have predictable lines and understanding how they can produce and sell. So in all this, you know, very complicated picture, we are quite sure that with China and other consumers, including EU is a very good partner for Russia for consuming oil and gas. But at the same time, we understand that we cannot afford to leave the same standards as we got used for, you know, for the period of 15 years. It was a very good period. We were able to achieve a lot. The country is not that poor as we started in 2000 or 1999. So, you know, this is a big, strong economy with its difficulties, as everybody has in their country's difficulties. But now the understanding that we cannot afford living the same and based on high oil prices, it's obvious, and it's good that we understand this.
I want to pinpoint the question in the oil market today. Is this fight by Saudi Arabia for market share Can we find common ground with Russia and the United States so we don't debilitate future investment into oil? $50 is very painful for Russia.
$50 price is not painful for oil companies. It's painful for the country because of the revenues. But if you speak with Lukoil, I see the president of the company here and other producers, $50 per barrel is okay for them. They will be very good developing companies. They will sell their products. It's okay. It'll be very painful for us, for the government and for the regional governments to how to produce the same life standards and, for the things we got used to, including many things we import, we buy from abroad. So, but again, so for the oil producers, it's okay, this price. And so they will be very competitive. Of course, they are not producing, their costs much higher than in the Gulf countries, but they will be competitive. But for the budgetary purposes, it's very painful.
Deputy Prime Minister Šuválov, a Russian executive, said something very prescient, I thought. He said, it's very hard to see a solution with Russia and Ukraine when it's gotten so personal between President Putin, U.S. President Barack Obama, German Chancellor Angela Merkel. It's become so personal that there's no easy exit out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. That has to be the #1 risk, and I don't see an easy solution to it as we go into 2015.
I disagree. I understand that now everybody is speaking about Ukraine when the subject is about Russia, but that's not the case. I agree that #1 geopolitical risk at the moment, terror threat. And when everything started in Syria, my president was very strong addressing to the American nation and American president and speaking with the European leaders that Syria is not our neighbor, but so close. And the whole region is very fragile. Once any military operation starts, it could influence our peaceful existing immediately. And Russian people don't feel safe when, people in the States talk about any possible military action in Syria or in Iran or elsewhere. So, and at the same time, you need to remember the size of my country. It's huge. We start from the Baltic seas, and then the ocean, the Pacific Ocean is the next edge. So when something happens in Iran or Syria, Turkey, we feel it, and we feel it strongly. Of course, Ukraine. Ukraine is not only our neighbor. We feel Ukrainians as our friends, family members. I don't know how to call them. They're so close to us. So many Ukrainians living in Russia, so many Russians living in Ukraine.
So one would argue you like them so much, you've gone into the eastern half of the country.
I know those jokes, but
I don't mean that as a joke, actually. But
actually, we are not meaning anything, and I didn't hear anything from my president or prime minister, meaning that we have interests to separate these regions from Ukraine. We are interested in having whole Ukraine as it is, as the sovereign country. The only thing we want to stop the war, because that war influences us, and this geopolitical risk, but not the major one, because all regional wars, all regional conflicts will influence Russia, and people who are going to invest, they don't feel safe. That's not only the investment climate. People are always talking about investment climate. They will say how we feel with our friend China, and for the last decade our relationship became much better. So people are coming and invest in the neighbor regions from outside, and we see not only Chinese investors from Korea, from Japan and others, even American and Canadian companies investing there. But before, I think it was impossible, because for them it was a real risk. So now, at some part of my country it's becoming safer, and some where it is Ukraine or closer to those regions where the Middle East is, so that's more dangerous. And again, I would repeat it, and I agree, geopolitical risk #1 for 15, and maybe next year's will be terror threat.